Do you need to combine fasting with keto? Or can you fast with carbs and get the same effect? Of course you can, but it all depends on what your goal is. So I've divided this video into different categories so that different people can learn what is going to work best for them given their goals. So we're going to talk about people that are just starting to lose weight, what they should do, like in terms of what's the best for just getting started. Then we're going to talk about people that are doing like maybe power athletics, like maybe they're people that are doing CrossFit or sports, what kind of fasting / carbs or keto is best for them. Then we're going to talk about people that are maintaining, okay, people that have lost weight. Then we're going to talk about bodybuilders and building muscle. And then lastly, we'll talk about longevity and aging and what form is best there. Because not all of them need to be combining keto and fasting. Some can combine keto and carbs, believe it or not. So let's break it down. People automatically assume that because you fast, you automatically do keto along with it. That's very annoying. That's not the way that it is. People also assume that if you do keto, you automatically do intermittent fasting. They're very similar pathways and very similar like metabolic goals. So I understand how that comes into play, but we have to break down like what's really working here. So if you are someone that is starting to lose weight and you're trying to get off the standard American diet, what is best for you? Well, realistically, you're the kind of person that probably should combine keto and fasting. I know it sounds crazy because most people would probably tell you, maybe start with intermittent fasting because it's really hard to get off the carbs. And I understand that it's hard to give up the carbs. And I totally respect that there's a little bit of emotional turmoil that would go into that. But the reality is that keto and fasting work synergistically so well together in this particular category that I think you'd be shooting yourself in the foot to try to fast first without doing a little bit of keto. Keto sort of opens the doorway so that fasting is easier. So here's what you would do. You'd start with keto, eat the same amount of food as you normally would, just go keto. Then the next step is start removing snacks, but still stay keto. Then start fasting. And that's an evolution that actually combines keto and fasting very well. And here's the data to back it up because the metabolic goal and drivers are similar between fasting and keto, so it works so well. There's a study published in the journal Clinical Nutrition that took a look at people that did 8 weeks of alternate day fasting. They found at the end of 8 weeks, it had improved their fasting insulin levels tremendously. Then there was another study. This one published in the journal Nutrition and Diabetes, and it found that the ketogenic diet improves glycemic control and, once again, insulin levels, fasting insulin levels. So that whole insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance thing. Very, very important. So you see, we're working on two very similar pathways. Fasting gets similar results with insulin. Keto gets similar results with insulin. Best combination for getting started and getting off bad food to begin with. But here's what's really wild. There was a large study published in the journal JAMA. Took a look at 60 studies with over 5,600 people, and it found that fasting insulin levels being reduced would always precede weight loss. That is super cool. What that tells us is that reducing the insulin levels first is the most important thing. So keto, modulation of insulin levels. Fasting, modulation of insulin levels. If you can modulate those insulin levels, chances are you're going to lose weight. And this meta-analysis really demonstrates that well. Whether it's weight loss or any goal, however, one of the most important things is still protein. Okay, so talking about fasting with keto, fasting with carbs, the one thing that should be a common denominator for you is keeping protein levels moderately high. Because you're fasting, you're going to be degrading things and you need to rebuild. It's very important to have the protein come back to rebuild what you have degraded during a fast. Today's video sponsor is ButcherBox, which is an online grass-fed, grass-finished meat delivery company. So they have tremendous grass-fed, grass-finished beef. We're talking like top sirloin, we're talking filet mignon, we're talking ribeyes, all kinds of things that work great on keto, or there's leaner cuts of meat if you're trying to go for fish, if you're trying to go for chicken. Gets delivered right to your doorstep. I've been using them for years. They've been a sponsor on this channel for 4 or 5 years, and there's a special link down below just for viewers of this channel. So check them out after this video and get a box of grass-fed, grass-finished meat delivered to your doorstep. It is super awesome. Highly, highly recommend them, and a big thank you to them for the continued support on this channel. So make sure you check them out for really good quality stuff down below in the description. Okay, moving into the next one. People that are doing sports or athletics. Okay, people that are maybe doing CrossFit, or maybe you play soccer or something like that. You're someone that might do better combining fasting with carbs. Not always, and I'll explain. Fasting is hugely beneficial for power athletes, like tremendously beneficial. Why? Okay, for one, body composition. Okay, show me a case outside of like maybe swimming where having a little bit of buoyancy, where having fat on you is actually really helping you a whole lot. Not saying you need to be 1% body fat, but generally an improvement in body composition is going to make you lighter, more nimble, and probably quicker. So yes, we have that benefit. But what about performance? We have to look at that too. First off, I think it's misconstrued how much power people use in given sports. For example, soccer is not as anaerobic or like, I don't know, power driven as people might think. Even American football isn't as power driven as people think. The large majority of it is still very aerobic based. It's just at a higher intensity of that aerobic range. Okay, so believe it or not, a lot of those athletes could still probably do okay doing keto and fasting, but let's just say that most of them want to do fasting with carbs. Even if you're fasting with carbohydrates, you still get a huge benefit, especially as an athlete. Okay, because that fasting is going to develop a level of metabolic flexibility. It's going to get you fat adapted. When you're fat adapted as a power athlete, it means that you are able to use fat at a higher intensity. What does that mean? Well, it means that even when you're pushing at like 70% of your maximum intensity, your body is still using fats as a fuel source, which is a much more efficient source of fuel. And what does that do? It spares your glycogen. So your glycogen are the carbs that are stored in your muscles. And this way, it spares them for times when you really need it, rather than burning it up all the time and bonking halfway through the event, right? Because you have a more sustainable source of fuel from fat, conditioning your body to use that fat through a wider spectrum makes you more available to use those carbs when you really need them, when everyone else is bonking. You also increase mitochondrial mass. Okay, mitochondrial mass is going to give you more just energy powerhouse availability. So you can create more energy through the aerobic pathway and potentially the anaerobic pathway too, just by having more mitochondrial mass available. Okay, then when we talk about recovery, because you're fasting, you probably have more insulin sensitivity, which means when you do have your carbs, you're going to be more receptive to soaking the carbs up, spiking insulin the way that you should to actually stimulate recovery. So it really does work well for the performance athlete. So short synopsis, combine carbs with fasting if you are a performance athlete, but periodically try doing keto and fasting and see how it affects your performance, because you might be surprised. Well, next up, we have bodybuilders or people that are trying to build muscle. Okay, here's the thing. When you are building muscle, you typically require protein, as we know, but you also require a little bit of insulin. Okay, insulin is very anabolic, very important for building muscle. But people think that fasting doesn't mix with building muscle. Fasting mixes tremendously well with building muscle. Makes you more insulin sensitive, makes it so that you're more receptive to what you eat, but it also encourages autophagy, which can help cellular repair, which I'll talk about in a second. But the problem is combining fasting and keto during a muscle building phase is pretty hard, okay? I am a firm believer that you can build muscle on keto. I am a firm believer that you can build muscle with fasting, but doing them both together at the same time, it can be hard, okay? Even me, when I was going through weight loss and I was trying to build muscle at the same time, I would periodically come off of keto so that I could still fast, have carbs to build muscle. You have to have these periodic kind of times where you do that. But fasting works very, very well for kind of inducing muscle growth in some ways, as long as you're getting sufficient protein and calories and possibly carbohydrates during your eating window. Autophagy, which is that cellular recycling mechanism that happens like during a fast, well, that also regulates what are called satellite cells. And when we regulate and activate more satellite cells, we are essentially creating more muscle cell nuclei. More muscle cell nuclei means more nuclei that can fuse and create a larger muscle, creating more protein synthesis. Hugely important, okay? Also, autophagy inhibitors, when autophagy doesn't happen, that seems to delay injury recovery. Okay, which could result in less muscle trauma being repaired and building muscle. So fasting actually lends itself quite well, but that is one use case where I would definitely recommend fasting plus carbs and protein. That kind of situation, definitely. And then the opposite of that comes to the longevity world. Okay, if you're doing fasting for aging reasons, you're trying to age better, you're trying to monitor that, then you probably do want to focus more so on keto and fasting. Why? Well, because mTOR, which is the anabolic signal, and insulin that spikes mTOR and triggers mTOR, those have been documented in multiple studies and really pretty widely known to be kind of pro-aging, okay? If we want to inhibit that aging a little bit more, we usually want to kind of mitigate that overall mTOR signaling. In fact, pretty much the last decade of research was summarized in a paper published in F1000 not that long ago. And it basically demonstrated that the inhibition of mTOR is what really can prolong lifespan. So both keto and fasting seem to inhibit mTOR because you're not having these massive insulin spikes as much. So there was another study published in the journal Science that took a look at ketones, beta-hydroxybutyrate. Okay, ketones generally are formed when we're in ketosis, doing a keto diet, or fasting. Well, it seems as though ketones indirectly activate what's called FOXO3. Okay, FOXO3 is one of 2 compounds that have been heavily documented to have a potential anti-aging effect. Okay, there's other little like random things, but ApoE4 and FOXO3 are the 2 big ones that are heavily looked at and heavily understood. So when it comes down to like the longevity piece, I hate to say it, but carbs could sort of impede that effect, or at least impede the effect that we are gaining from fasting and combining keto. So just to sum it all up, just again, if you're trying to get started and lose weight, combine keto and fasting. If you're trying to do like athletics and more power sports, yeah, keto and carbs is probably best. If you're trying to maintain weight, generally keto and fasting will keep you more satiated, but if you want to do something where you have more emotional stability, alternate back and forth between keto fasting and carb fasting. And then if you're trying to build muscle, fasting plus carbs. And if you're trying to go for more of a longevity effect, fasting plus keto. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.